Hey everyone, wherever you are, I hope you are having a wonderful week so far. We're here with the latest episode of the Inside Crypto Show, interviews and discussions with regular people just like yourselves. Today we are joined by Hugo Philion, the CEO and co-founder of Flare Network. Flare is a new blockchain built to connect everything. It presents developers with a simple and coherent stack for interoperability. This allows developers to build applications that capture the largest possible addressable market, serving multiple communities and ecosystems simultaneously through a single deployment. That sounds easy. We'll talk about that later. I have to do the usual disclaimer. Anything said by either Hugo or myself does not constitute financial advice. Our opinions are our own and not to be connected with our respective organizations. Please, everyone, do your own research. Because it's just Hugo today, we're going to spend more time diving into his background. Hugo, welcome to the show. Tell us about yourself.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, as you said, I'm CEO and co-founder of Flare. My background essentially was I was a commodity trader at a number of hedge funds. I quit that and went back to university to study machine learning, UCL in London. And that's where I met my two co-founders, Sean Rowan, who's our CTO and has a background as an electronic engineer, and Nairi Usha, who's our chief scientist and has a background as a quantum computing doctor.
Wow, very cool. What made you decide to get into crypto, going from commodities into crypto? What was that like piece of information or knowledge or something that you saw in the news that say, okay, let's give this a go?
So for me, it was more or less a desire to build something of consequence. That really dictated my decision. It met relatively well with my skill sets because it's financial. I'm a big believer in decentralization, having seen what centralized markets look like from the inside and how those operate, and the sort of preferential, how do I put this politely, the preferential position given to various market actors. So it's a very easy conversion to believing that essentially financial liberation is an important aspect of our development as a civilization. And blockchain or crypto or whatever you want to call it, some people call it Web3, is a particularly, at least to me, looks to be a particularly fantastic tool for shifting what has traditionally been the preserve of a small elite over to the wider population, provided, of course, that they do take responsibility for their actions.
I'm sure we'll get into some of this later. Like with what you're doing with Flare, would you consider this Web3 or blockchain or a combination of the two?
We think of it as an infrastructure blockchain.
Infrastructure blockchain. Very cool. And I mean, again, some softball questions before we get into the hard stuff. Do you think, looking at crypto today, 2022 or October, almost in 2023, have we come far enough in terms of decentralization? Have we unlocked the potential for the everyman? Are we there yet, or do we still have a long way to go?
The short answer is no. We're still very nascent in the actual underlying technology. I still don't think that there's any true settlement on how consensus protocols should operate, be constructed. I think there's more consensus protocol research to be done. There's questions of the long-term viability of things like proof of stake. Of course, these are all extremely useful things today, but I still think there's a lot more challenges at the infrastructure layer. And then at the interoperability layer, we obviously think that a lot of people have rushed to put out relatively poor products, and that has led to the number of hacks that you've seen. We think that there's a lot more rigorous work to be done on the infrastructure side before you actually get to a usable system for the everyman, as you say.
Very cool.
I'm particularly, just to be clear, I'm particularly excited about some of the new Layer 1 blockchain launches coming up, specifically Sui and Aptos look very interesting.
Good. One of our researchers is a big fan of Aptos. All right, Hugo, let's move on to the star of today, which is the Flare Network and what you guys are doing. When I was approached about having you on the show, I'm like, this is cool. And dug into Flare. I'm like, okay, this is really cool. Give our listeners and our viewers a high sort of level overview of what Flare Network is. I did do a little bit of a brief intro in the beginning, but I think that's pretty complicated for some people. What are you guys doing?
So as you've picked up, our kind of message is connect everything. But that's incredibly nebulous if you want to think of it from a technical standpoint. So what is Flare? Flare is a layer 1 EVM blockchain based on a modified version of Avalanche consensus. It has two core protocols embedded directly into the blockchain. The first is what we call the Flare time series oracle. This is an embedded price oracle. So this allows Flare to understand prices from external data sources, so data that is external to the blockchain. And we think this has been in testing on our CanaryNet Songbird for over a year now. We have more than 100 what we call oracles providing prices to the network. So this is one of the more decentralized oracles in the space, and it operates extremely well. So that's the first protocol. The second protocol is what we call the state connector. The state connector is I guess what we term a consensus algorithm to allow Flare to come to consensus over the state of another blockchain. So what has happened on another blockchain? So it's very simple, really. EVM layer 1 blockchain, so you can write smart contracts with two protocols that bring in data from outside, price and state. And then everything else can be built on top of that. So that's why we say connect everything. So specifically, those protocols are open. Anyone can build an application that takes price and state, or one of the two. But we can also do very interesting things ourselves. And we, as a team, we're building essentially two bridges. And those bridges allow, the first bridge is what we call F-assets. It's a synthetic replication on Flare of non-smart contract assets, like Bitcoin, like XRP, like Dogecoin, Litecoin, and anything that essentially isn't a smart contract. Doesn't have smart contract capabilities. So we're looking to roll that out at some point in the future. And that would allow people with those assets to use those assets on Flare in things like DeFi, staking into AMMs, borrowing against their assets, lending their assets, those kind of things. So using those assets with DeFi. Of course, that already exists in some capacity on other chains. It's not beat around the bush there. We think this presents a far better way to do it that doesn't have the same essentially centralized limitations that existing systems have. We also are building the network such that those that do bring assets to Flare essentially get vested in Flare. So they become token holders of Flare. So it's a sort of long-term program such that if you bring your value to Flare, you become a Flare token holder. So that is the F assets. And then the second protocol we're looking to roll out is what we call Layer Cake. Layer Cake is what we think of as a highly sophisticated smart contract token bridge for things like USDC, USDT, ETH, any token you want to bridge to another network. It's quite interesting because it has an element of insurance over the operators of the bridge and insurance against chain reorganization. It's a risk that is rarely accounted for in bridges, but if the chain essentially has a rollback of state, then it's quite possible that your bridging transaction could essentially cease to exist on the new chain. And that obviously damages the bridge by making the bridge undercapitalized. Flare has a way to account for that. And then lastly, Layer Cake will be multilateral, such that you can bridge from any chain to any chain within the Layer Cake system, and all of the liquidity is essentially aggregated rather than fragmented. So this is very different to a series of bilateral bridges where you would end up with lots of different tokens for the same underlying token. So to give you an example, if you wanted to say Avalanche from 3 different chains, and you weren't using a particular native bridge that may or may not exist, then you would essentially end up with several different tokens because you'd be using bridges that are built by different parties. With Layer Cake, regardless of where you're bridging from, you would end up with the same wrap token. And that is a step change in how essentially liquidity works in bridging.
Wow, that's cool. I have to say, this is definitely elevated my understanding. Hugo, I have to ask, because we've had a few people on this show who are doing like really innovative things with layer ones like you are. But I have to ask, like, why not use existing solutions? Like you mentioned, you use a different version of Avalanche. Why not just use Avalanche or some other protocol to build on? Why make Flare?
So Avalanche, as it exists today, would not allow us to build essentially the protocols that we have built embedded into Flare. So it wouldn't allow us to integrate the Oracle, and it wouldn't allow us to integrate the state connector. So that's a very clear reason why we've not built directly on Avalanche. We also couldn't build directly on an Avalanche subnet because of the way they enforce essentially the validator membership on Avalanche subnets. And then with other protocols, we didn't think the consensus algorithm was really capable of meeting the sort of scalability that we require. It must be said that the Avalanche consensus algorithm is really one of the pretty much the best consensus algorithm in the space at the raw technical level.
You mentioned bridges as well, and this is later on in the show, but you mentioned it, so let's get into it. Mango happened last week. That wasn't really a hack or an exploit. You decide, depends who you want to ask. But there have been a lot of hacks this year, and people associate hacks with bridges. Wormhole, another great example.
Ronin.
Yes, yes. So how people listening to this were like, oh my God, a bridge, this sounds risky. Are bridges risky?
Absolutely. They are. They don't have to be. I think there's been a couple of things. I'll only talk from our experience. Firstly, I think the way you design something matters. A lot of the design, I guess, remits for existing bridges, to our mind, embed a huge amount of risk into the bridge. For instance, just a very simple example, allowing a bridging transaction which allows essentially up to 100% of the entire bridge value to flow across the bridge in a single step. That obviously embeds the risk that if there is a problem with the bridge, then the bridge can be totally exploited. So that's a design decision that someone made along the way to have a bridge that can bridge a total amount in one time step. We don't make that design decision. We make design decisions such that we feel the risk is limited, because we feel that if you can remove risk from blockchain or reduce the risk of using blockchain, then we have a much greater probability of becoming an industry that can support mass utility. Our game as an organization within the industry is to mediate the risk in blockchain such that people feel comfortable to use it. And as a result of that, the usage increases substantially. So that's one of the first things, design. Then testing. Almost all of the bridges you've seen, almost all the bridge hacks you've seen have an audit. And the audit process, to our mind, is somewhat broken. So a team will go away and build a product, and then they'll have a 4 or 5 week audit at the end of the product build. We think that 4 or 5 weeks is not enough time to get an audit team, an external audit team, to understand every aspect of how a bridge works or how a protocol works. So we think that the audit industry, or the way it's structured, is somewhat antithetical. The way we are building our protocols is by embedding the auditor into the build from pretty much day one. This costs us 5 to 6 times more to audit the protocol, but we think that is a substantially better way to do it. So that's one of the areas that we mediate risk. And then the last is testing. We've been extremely rigorous with testing. We have a test net, then we have a canary net. So a canary net is essentially Flare, but it's an explicit beta version of Flare. So it's like our version of Kusama. It's where we intend to test our protocols. It's where we will also direct grant recipients to test their protocols, because it's not just us that suffer from the potential for issues. It's every developer that builds on Flare. So we think that the more you test, the better. The more you test with real value on our canary net, the better, because it provides an incentive for white hat hackers essentially to take a little bit of value, but also to do so explicitly with the fact that it is testing.
Thanks for that explanation. You mentioned testing, and I love like embedding the auditor from day one. It's just a fantastic way to get things started, given the current state of the global economy, right? And Flare has stakeholders. Every organization has stakeholders. Is it financially sustainable to be this methodical when it comes to testing?
Yeah, we're relatively well capitalized. We have some very defined things that we want to ship. Once those are shipped and well tested, we obviously don't need to continue the extensive testing, but we'd rather ship something that we've truly done everything in order to make it as robust as possible, because at the end of the day, we're building products that deal with people's money.
Of course.
And I do actually find the attitude generally within the space when it comes to dealing with people's hard-earned money to be a little bit lax. There are many cultures around the world where when you lose people money, there is a large amount of shame. And I feel as a development community, crypto could do with adopting that kind of mentality a little bit.
Yep.
It's not to say we won't have hiccups. We probably will. But if we've designed our products properly, the hiccups that we may suffer will be of far less consequence than if we design them in the way that many of the existing products have been designed.
Yep, I totally agree with that. And yeah, nothing is perfect and hiccups might happen. Hugo, one of the things I think you mentioned earlier as well is, and I think a lot of people, no matter your expert level in crypto, will be familiar with the Cosmos Hub. And so that sort of idea of connecting different blockchains, is that what you're doing with Flare? Are you guys similar to Cosmos? Are you different?
So it's interesting you bring up Cosmos. We are different, but we have a similar thesis. So Cosmos is for connecting Cosmos-based chains. Basically, that's what Cosmos excels at. It, however, isn't particularly well structured for connecting non-Cosmos chains. For instance, if you look at IBC protocol, which is how Cosmos is connecting the various chains within the Cosmos ecosystem, it requires blockchains to adopt that protocol, the core infrastructure level, or it requires someone to build essentially an adapter on top of another protocol. Firstly, there's no probability of multiple different blockchains all adopting one standard. It just seems complete. If you followed any of the discussion of consensus or the Bitcoin discussions over consensus, it's very clear that no one will adopt a single standard. And then the adaptation to use IBC, to our mind, serves no better than the existing bridging products or existing messaging products. It doesn't have the guarantees that the IBC system does. So what Flare is trying to do is essentially be the Cosmos for all non-Cosmos based chains, if that's a way to think about it. And actually the value sitting on non-Cosmos based chains far exceeds the value by a factor of at least 10, if not 100, of the value sitting on Cosmos based chains. So we think the opportunity is quite large.
You mentioned non-Cosmos chains, and will Flare work with, I gotta bring it up, Solana?
That's an open question. We would certainly think about integrating Solana. We are, however, of course, it's not at first in our roadmap. The consensus issues that Solana appears to suffer from time to time make interoperability for Solana extremely complex and make the risk of providing a bridge or a relay service for Solana very complex and risky.
Totally understandable given lots of news that have come out this year that I've talked about on this podcast, other guests have talked about. Hugo, one of the things I wanted to ask as well was, when it comes to devs and them listening and watching this video, like, what is your quick pitch for them saying, okay, this is really cool, I love what Hugo is proposing? When it comes to Flare, what's your quick pitch for them to say, hey guys, come and give Flare a go and start developing?
So we have two kind of streams. It's either build on Flare or build with Flare. So if you're building on Flare, you can serve our ecosystem, which is essentially whoever decides to come to Flare with their assets from other networks, whether that's smart contract assets or non-smart contract assets. And so far, we've been fairly successful in gaining the appreciation of several non-smart contract asset communities. So that's where we're starting first, the large sources of value from non-smart contract assets. Then when we say build with Flare, you could potentially, over the longer term, once they're rolled out, you could use Flare's bridges, Layer Cake, for example, and potentially data relay protocol that can be built on top of Flare to build your application on any network but building with Flare to serve the communities of several networks, or all networks.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying that. Another thing I wanted to ask Hugo was, you talked about devs, and I'm looking through your docs on your website, and having interviewed other similar people who are working on their own blockchain ideas, it's like sometimes you look at this, okay, cool, this is really interesting, but I'm a regular person. I may know a little bit of Solidity, I may know a little bit of other languages, but I'm not a dev. But I really like what you guys are doing. Can regular people like myself get involved with Flare and join in on Telegram or Discord and that sort of stuff? Is that doable, or do you have to be
Of course,
a dev?
absolutely. So the core responsibility of a Flare token holder is to delegate their token. Two things. It's to delegate their token to an oracle. So this is really where we've embedded the oracle into the network. You can, although it's not strictly proof of stake, you can think of our oracle system of being a large proof of stake oracle network, whereby essentially the native token holders delegate to those oracles. So that's the core responsibility of a Flare token holder, and you earn rewards for doing that. So inflation, that is the mechanism for earning the majority of inflation. And then the second core responsibility of a Flare token holder is to participate in governance. Governance uses both of our blockchains. So it uses Songbird to filter for governance. So what that means is that the community can put up as many governance proposals as they like, and then people stake to that proposal. And then a winning proposal that gets staked to is then passed up to Flare for voting. And so governance is an important aspect of Flare. So that is how relatively more ordinary people participate directly with the native token. And then with regards to the bridges, so the bridges obviously technically complex, but they don't have to be complex at the front end level. And we have grants available, and we also make our own efforts to build usable front ends. For instance, to give you an example, we have been working with a team to build a wallet for Flare. That's called Bifrost, and it's available on Android and iOS. And that wallet has a native application to allow you to delegate your token, your Flare token, to the Oracle system. And they have plans for when the non-smart contract bridges and smart contract bridges are rolled out to enable that through the wallet too. The technology is complex. The interaction with the technology doesn't have to be excessively so.
Hugo, another thing I wanted to ask as well was that I would say simultaneously working with other people, when Flare is more mainstream, is everywhere, what do you hope your impact is on the crypto ecosystem, and what do you want the impact to be, I should say?
So broadly, we want the impact to be such that Flare enables for developers and for users an ability to go to any chain, whether that's with data across different chains through a relay system that can be built on Flare, or whether that's with value through bridging products. And I think, again, it's really important to stress that our core interoperability protocols are open. So it's not just us building the functionality that provides interoperability. Anyone can use Flare to create an interoperable product, whether it's a product for themselves, for their own application, or whether it's a generic interoperability product offered to the market more broadly.
Nice. I think that's very useful as well, because yeah, you give people the tools and people will build. We're almost at the end of 2023. Let's go a bit broad here. Given the macro situation, which I mentioned at the beginning of the show, what are you expecting in 2023 broadly for crypto, DeFi, that sort of stuff?
I think one of the positive trends is that there does appear to be an increasing appetite to give regulatory clarity. Regulators are getting more involved in crypto. They now see it's not going away. Regulatory clarity, whilst we obviously as an industry, we want to be able to build what is feasible, and getting regulators to understand what is feasible is a complex process, but regulatory clarity will allow essentially a larger number of developers to be confident in what they're building, to take essentially anything you do that reduces the risk to an entrepreneur of building means that entrepreneur has a greater probability of success. So this is broadly positive for the industry. Macro, I can't say. I don't think anyone can. That being said, I don't take the view that maybe the broad industry takes, is that we need a positive macro environment for crypto to really operate. If you remember that Bitcoin was launched as an alternative to the, well, terrible macro environment of 2008, 2009. And actually, I think broadly the existing financial system demonstrating that it doesn't necessarily serve the purpose that it should be serving because it's not functioning properly is actually broadly positive for crypto.
Hugo, you mentioned regulation. We always get a lot of American guests on, and you're in Dubai. Everyone knows Dubai's regulation is pretty decent, but I wanted to ask about England. What do you think about English regulation, the Bank of England, compared to the States or other countries, right? Like, where do you think England's going to sit on the regulatory fence moving forward into next year?
So I'm on the advisory board of something called the Digital Economy Institute for the UK.
Oh, very nice.
And it's I guess it's a non-partisan think tank that intends to help the UK regulators understand crypto and get to grips with it. And whilst I can't necessarily say that the UK is today the most friendly environment for crypto, otherwise I wouldn't be here, simply because essentially no one within the government, or at least the policy, there may be people thinking about crypto in the government, but the policy has not yet been formed. What I would say about the UK is that there is genuine effort amongst many parties in the government to create a good crypto policy that benefits the UK as a country. And I can only encourage that.
That's great to hear. I think lots of people would love that. Hugo, I don't want to keep you for too long. 2023, like you said, it's we don't know what's going to happen next year, but I always love to give guests a chance at the end of the show. Is there anything particularly you want to plug about Flare? What should people listening to this, like they're already excited about Flare, what should they look forward to from Flare coming in the next 6 months to 1 year?
So the first thing that's going to happen on Flare is there's going to be a governance that changes the structure of how the token is distributed. I believe that is a particularly good governance vote because it allows essentially anyone to partake in Flare to participate and for them to become essentially, I guess, vested in Flare. So the token under the governance vote, if the governance vote passes, would be essentially distributed over 36 months to those people that hold the token and delegate it to an oracle. So this is our way of essentially decentralizing the token ownership by allowing essentially participation from anyone in the market. We think that's a good way to distribute a token, to have a broad distribution. So that's the first element of what will be happening on Flare, and I expect that proposal to pass. And then, of course, for us, there's obviously, we're always working on how to make Flare better. We have some thoughts on how to make the Oracle better. We have some thoughts on other products that can be built on Flare. So we probably have an endless sort of bank of things that we'll be working on. I think I'm most excited about getting the State Connector launched on Flare so that anyone can build applications on Flare or into on Flare that use state from other chains and use those either directly on Flare to do something or use those with other blockchains for interoperability. So one of the biggest grants that we will be essentially vesting on a development team will be over the formulation and execution of a generic data relay service using Flare. So this is quite an interesting proposition, whereby someone could come along and use the state connector to essentially slash relay nodes that propagate information between different chains, because this makes essentially a data relay service representable broadly as a smart contract on Flare. And that kind of encapsulates the exact thing that we've built Flare for, which is to give you access to all this data such that all you need to do to build something complex is to build a smart contract on Flare.
That's impressive and so exciting at the same time. I'm looking forward to following you guys next year. In that vein, Hugo, I've got all of Flare's socials, websites, Telegram, that sort of stuff. I do know you are on Twitter, and I was wondering if you'd like to share that in the show notes, or would you prefer people just focus on Flare Network?
I follow both would be my suggestion.
Okay, then I will put your Twitter down in the show notes. So for everyone, follow Hugo, follow Flare Network, keep an eye on them. I, of course, before this, I've already followed everything available. And if you guys have any questions about Hugo or Flare, you can send them to me. You can ask Hugo directly. I'm sure there are loads of ways to get in contact with Flare Network. And if you'd like to see Hugo come on in a few months' time and talk about all the things that they're doing, the endless bank of ideas, as he put it, please let me know. Send me an email, tweet at me on Twitter. And otherwise, we will talk to Hugo hopefully sometime next year. Hugo, thank you again, and I hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you so much for your time.